Hi class, hopefully you can hear me. I having troubles with my mute and unmute button. Okay, so I wanted to give you an example on how to score your skill. Now, some of you, most of you actually did the assignment correctly where you chose a construct, so a variable, and then when you went to give a definition, so for example, if you chose something like depression, there are many different ways of talking about depression, right? So depression varies from everyday sadness to full-blown clinical disorder. So that's why you do have to include your construct and exactly what you're talking about. If you're talking about, more of the dysthymia where things aren't totally bad, but you've been pretty down lately, then you need to clarify that, right? The second part of that was looking for an operational definition that is in the form of a scale, a questionnaire, or an inventory. Now, when you had that, you needed to also make sure, and I gave you feedback on this specifically for each and every one of yours, if you had the scoring instructions included or if you still needed to go and find it. Those scoring instructions are going to be very, very important for when you're actually creating your survey and then when you actually go into data analysis with all of the information that you get from your surveys. So I wanted to do this quick presentation to kind of show you with an example of using the BFI. If you remember the BFI from previous psychology courses, this was an inventory that has to do with personality traits, boiled down to the main 5 that most people are able to say that they have strongly on one side of the spectrum or another, or neutral. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So BFI stands for Big Five Inventory. 2 is important for a reason because the second one is the current edition that we're using. The first one is a little bit outdated. And the reason I wanted you to find one that was a little bit more current is because times change, so does slang, so does a way for us to actually interpret and answer items on a scale. So I do have this in PDF version. My PowerPoint just keeps turning into a different recording type of platform. So I wanted to, you'll see that it's a little bit faster, but sometimes when I move through, it's going to be a little bit blurry. Just wait a couple seconds and you'll be fine. Okay, so these are the full instructions, full directions for what I would actually do if you were in a face-to-face course with me. So in face-to-face course, I would actually pull up the BFI 2 personality assessment, print it out, and I would give everybody about 5 to 10 minutes to complete this. So I'm actually going to show you how to find this. So the BFI is one that I like to use because if you just do a quick Google search, Big Five Inventory, you don't even need to go into Google Scholar, even though that's available too. You'll see that up here it says PDF. PDF, sometimes you'll see, if it doesn't say PDF, you'll have to click through and see if you can find the actual version of it. But the first hit that comes up is actually from Colby College. So this is a university over in Maine, and they specialize in validating and showing reliability of this scale. So let's go ahead and click on this. It shows us the docx or PDF file, and you'll see that the instructions are right on top. So here are a number of characteristics that may or may not apply to you. For example, do you agree that you are someone who likes to spend time with others? Write down a number to each statement to indicate which you agree or disagree with a statement. So every scale is a little bit different, but you have to know what the numbers stand for. So on this specific scale, inventory, 1 means strongly disagree, 2, disagree a little, 3 is neutral or no opinion, 4, agree a little, 5, agree strongly. Sometimes you'll have even numbers. We'll talk about this in a future lecture or topic module, but if it's split up into 6, that means it's forcing a person to choose one way or the other, and there is no neutral. So sometimes you'll see scales that have 4 items, or sorry, 4 different types of responses you could have. You see 6, you could see 7. 7 means that there is this neutral or no opinion option, just like here in the BFI 2. So 2 has, the second edition has 60 items. That means if you divide this by 5, which is the big 5, right? So if you divide it by 5, each 5 of these traits, you do come up with 12 different items. So of these 60, 12 actually goes to measure each of the 5 personality traits, which we'll get into. Another important part of this is if you scroll down, here's the scoring key. Now, you might see on a scale that you chose that it's called scoring instructions, scoring directions. As long as it tells you how to score, this is going to be important for when you actually go to code your analysis or code your data. So here are the domain scales: extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, negative emotionality, open-mindedness. This is also called neuroticism. We'll talk about that in a different time. You'll also see that there are some subscales. Now, if you're not specifically doing this, you don't need to worry about it. But if you're studying instead of one of the big 5, you wanted to really look at something like organization or compassion, this will tell you that there are actually 4 items on here that looks at compassion, right? Always at either the end or the beginning of one of these pages, you'll see the citation for the BFI2. Again, it is an APA, but it's not exactly formatted the way that it should be, right? So you know that there's going to be an indent over here, it's going to be double spaced, and always follow the rules for APA format in the 7th edition. This was in 2017. So this is actually not in APA 7th edition, but you should know what APA 7th edition looks like now. We'll come back to this a little bit later. Okay, so here are the full instructions. Again, if you were doing this in class, I would ask you to complete the BFI 2 and then find the items on the inventory that corresponds to the 5 traits. I'll show this to you on one of the upcoming slides. You're going to reverse score the items that have the letter R next to them. You might remember this from statistics and probability, where if there is a question that is asking, or sorry, there's an item or a question that is asking a person to respond in a way to make sure that it's valid, then it might be in the reverse order. In that case, those items will have an R next to them, and you know to reverse score, which I will show you how to do within the next couple of minutes. You're going to add up your responses together. You have to also add up the reverse score, so you have to do that first. So add up your response after you reverse score the appropriate items. Okay, forgot that I was going to say that. So I said it twice. So doubly make sure that you reverse code them first. After finding the sum of the items, the sum is the total amount. So you're going to calculate all of that for each of the traits separately, each of the big 5 traits. Calculate the average score for each trait. This is not new to you. You should have learned how to do this, back in primary school, in secondary school. So finding the average score means finding the mean, right? So if you're remembering the central measures of tendency, the mean is what we're looking for. The way that you do this is you calculate the average score by dividing the total score by the number 12. Because remember how I showed you there were 60 items. Each of the big 5 has 12 items that goes along with it. So there are 12 items for each subscale, which corresponds to each of the big 5 traits. And then you submit your scores. If this didn't make a lot of sense because you need some visuals, I will go ahead and take you through this process fully right now. Okay. Here are the instructions. So I do forget sometimes, so you'll see me refer back to this page every so often, but each scale is different. Sometimes you'll have the number 1 selection response saying agree strongly. It is usually disagree to agree, but you'll have some inventories that are the opposite. So always refer back to what the scale instructions say. So for each item that you see coming up, right? For example, do you agree that you are someone who likes to spend time with others? Then you would choose of each of these responses off of this Likert scale. It is pronounced Likert. Sometimes you'll hear me say Likert because I'm used to saying that, but it is the Likert scale. So from 1 to 5, 1, disagree strongly, 2 meaning I disagree a little bit, 3 meaning neutral or no opinion, or I don't strongly agree or disagree, 4 agree a little bit, 5 agree strongly. So we'll come back to this too because I've been looking at scales all day, so sometimes I forget. So the Big Five does measure 5 different types of personality traits. They're boiled down into other sub-traits too, as you saw from the scoring instructions, but the Big Five is pretty accurate. It's been around long enough, and again, at Colby College, they do spend a lot of time going through to make sure it's reliable, meaning dependable and consistent, and then also that it is valid. So are these items actually measuring what they're supposed to, which is the personality trait of openness or to closeness. So all of these are on a spectrum: openness to closeness, conscientiousness to the opposite. So what conscientious means is actually more dependable, right? But order, organization. So for example, somebody who is conscientious would be like an airline pilot, right? They are dependable because for the most part, they want to leave on time. This is important for traffic control, all these things. If your plane is late, it's likely because it's one of the later planes that is coming in at the end of the day due to delays and all these other things. So if you're running late and the gate has already closed, the airplane is no longer boarding, and you're like, wait, I'm still here. The pilot who is conscientious will be like, I'm not opening the doors. Everybody who did make it on time, we can't just like depressurize the cabin or whatnot. Anyways, they're not going to let you on. They are dependable in that kind of a way, but they're less sensitive, right? So that's what conscientiousness means. Here, extroversion, somebody who is extroverted this is actually what we're going to look at. So extroversion has to do with people who are more outgoing characteristically. They are socially confident. It does not mean that they always have to be around people, but it does mean that they are energized by being around people and groups. They do enjoy to be the center of attention. Most times will often seek attention of others. They also enjoy meeting new people, are happy to introduce themselves to strangers, thriving in the company of others. The opposite of this would be somebody who's introverted. Now, introverted personality characteristics do get a bad rep because people assume that being introverted means that you are a loner, and that's not actually true. What is true is for people who are introverted, they are actually energized by having time to themselves. So it doesn't mean that they are not sociable, but they may have a couple of friends or like one-on-one, or maybe they like smaller groups, but they need to re-energize by being by themselves so that they're not overwhelmed by large groups. There is, researchers have found that there's actually an in-between called ambiverts. However, the Big Five, we are only looking at extroverts versus introverts, unless you're looking at a different type of personality trait. So next, agreeableness. So somebody who is agreeable, they will say yes. This sounds very similar to openness, but they're actually traits that separate them. The opposite end of this would be disagreeable or grumpy or crabby. And then this last one, neuroticism, is characterized by instability. So it's kind of like if you have a person in your life that it's almost like walking on eggshells around them because you don't know if they're going to, you know, have an outburst or something like that. So the opposite of neuroticism would be somebody who's very stable, somebody who has complete control over all of their emotions and might even just be too calm all the time. So these are all spectrums. Know that it's not one is better than the other. Usually we try to get you somewhere in between if you're doing therapy with somebody who is scoring very high on either of these. Okay, oh, sorry. So here's the extroversion subscale. Remember that when you're doing one of these types of personality inventories, it's ordered in a specific way. You are not going to create any of your own items. You might want to ask a question. Let's say that you did want to know about extroversion versus introversion, and maybe you wanted to ask a qualitative type of question. Maybe it's open-ended, having to do with, since we've had to be more socially isolated in the last 2 years because of the pandemic, how do you feel? How has your mood changed or something like that? That would be an open-ended question, but because you are not making these scales, I don't want you to make these scales, but also you actually have to have your doctorate in psychometrics in order to come up with an item. You can ask these things, just talk about it in your discussion for your project as if it was something that you were interested in, but you don't have a way to code it, right? Once you get into graduate school and you're able to create your own surveys or questionnaires, you can do that. But for now, we're only using scales, inventories, or questionnaires that have already been validated and deemed to be reliable by the experts. So here you'll see extroversion is outgoing, sociable. Let's refer back to the big five. Let me see. Okay, so remember, 1 strongly disagree, 5 strongly agree. And you'll see that I believe that number was number 1, right? So is outgoing and sociable? Then if you disagree strongly, you will put 1. If you agree strongly, then you'll put, I agree with the statement, you're gonna give yourself a 5, right? So you see that it doesn't go in order when we're looking at the subscales because it's meant to be in a way that people are answering without really knowing what they're answering for. It's not meant to be deceptive, it's just meant to mix it up a bit so that we can actually look at things that are reverse coded as well, just to make sure that you're doing the test or doing the scale according to answering honestly and accurately as possible. Okay, so number 6 also has to do with extroversion, has an assertive personality. Again, if you agree strongly, I believe agree was 5, right? So 1 being disagree strongly, 5 being agree strongly. Now 11 rarely feels excited or eager. So this sounds like it's reverse coded, but unless we actually have the scores, the scoring instruction, you're not going to guess or assume. It's meant to be something where you have to have the scoring instructions in order to use a scale. Tends to be quiet. If you're like, I disagree, I totally disagree with this, you're gonna put a 1 because that means you disagree with this statement. We're looking at extroversion, right? And then 21 is dominant, acts as leader. Oh, I totally agree. So I'll put a 5 for this. And then you go on and answer all of the 60 as you would as honestly as possible. And hopefully your respondents who you're giving these surveys to are also answering it as accurately as possible. Okay, so let's get into the ones that are reverse coded, right? So this is taken directly from the scale. 1 and 6 are, you leave them alone, but when you see an R, so like next to 11, it's also bolded. That means you're going to reverse code this. If 1 means strongly disagree, then 5 is going to mean strongly agree. So here, rarely feels excited or eager. If you disagree with this, right? Now you're going to actually put a 5. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. Let me double check to make sure because I can't remember for this scale. Oh, where did it go? Okay, here it is. So 5 agree, 1 disagree. I'm gonna write this down so I don't have to keep going back and forth for you. 5 agree, 1 disagree. All right, let's close this out. Okay, so let's say that rarely feels excited or eager. I would say, oh no, I totally disagree with that. So I'm gonna put a 1. And then for here, tends to be quiet. I disagree. Let's say a 2 instead. I don't agree totally, but there are times I can be quiet, right? You just actually go and answer these as so. But when you have these numbers, as I'll show you on an example over here, right? So remember, the closer you are to 5, you agree. And then the closer you are to 1, you disagree. So here, 4 is outgoing, sociable. This means this person agrees. They pretty much agree with this statement. Maybe not all the time, but for the most part. Has an assertive personality. Sure, I agree. I get along with people. That's why I want to be assertive. I want to let them know that I like this idea or don't really like it, but they're going to be a little bit more outspoken. And then 11 rarely feels excited or eager. So this is a 1 because they strongly disagree with this. They feel excited or eager very often, right? So when you're reverse coding, this 1 actually turns into a 5. I wish there was a way for me to write this somewhere. Let me see. Let me add a text box right here. Okay, so if you have a 1, this will turn into a 5. If you have a 2, this will turn into a 4. 3 will remain the same because it's neutral or no strong opinions either way. 4 will be actually a 2 reverse scored, and then 5 will be a 1. Put this somewhere where we can see it. That's what reverse coding means. I'll label this for you too. Okay. So here, 3 is dominant as a leader, but this is not reverse coded. This remains the same. 2, less active than other people. Look at the scoring up here. So 2 actually does mean a 4. We'll get to that a little bit on the next slide. And then 2, again, this is another score of a 4. So on the extroversion scale. And then 41, full of energy. I agree strongly. Number 4 is talkative. Sorry, number 46 got a score of 4, which is talkative. They agree. And then 51 is reverse coded. So this is actually opposite, right? This 1 should actually mean a 5. 56, 5 shows a lot of enthusiasm. So let's look at the actual scores. Oh, I did write it here. Okay, so the original score, if you scored a 1, it's now 5, 2 is now 4, 3 is a 3, 4 is a 2, 5 is a 1. Only for the ones that are reverse coded, such as that have an R next to it. So 11, item 11, item 16, this one. Item 26 is reverse coded. Item 31, 36, this one. And then we skip 46 and 41 because those are normal. And then 51 is also reverse coded. So remember, looking at this, you would change this to a 5 instead. This is important because you're going to now have to add all this up with the reverse score. So eventually you're going to have to do this in SPSS, or if you like to use Excel instead, or whatever your stats professor from last semester, the previous semesters taught you to use that you're most comfortable with. I have some students that are used to using R or using SAS. I have somebody who I believe in this classroom said that they like to use Python. If you know how to use any of those other ones besides SPSS, go ahead and use that. If you do not have access to SPSS anymore, there is a free website that I can have you download as well. But this is where you're going to have to input this in your functions. So remember that these ones that are bolded are reverse coded. I just did this so that you'll be able to notice the difference. But if you wanted to do this as well, just make sure that you remember which ones are reverse coded. So you're going to total up or sum up all of these numbers. So 4 plus 4 plus 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 4 plus 4 plus 3 plus 5 plus 4 plus 5 plus 5. And then once you have all of those, so this actually adds up to 50. Why are you dividing by 12? Because remember, there were 12 items for each of the subscales. So the 12 is looking at dividing by the extroversion subscale. This will give you a number. So for this one, the number was 4.1666666 forever, right? This is something that was rounded. You do have to round. Please round 2 spaces, 2 values after the decimal, right? In your stats class, in your math classes, I know that they might have you round more digits over, but keep it to just 2 values because this will keep your data pretty clean and not messy when you're later doing your data analysis. So you're going to calculate these for each of the following traits. Each of the traits, remember there's 5 of them, but if you're only looking at a subscale, because remember, you just have to choose one construct, right? I can't have you do all 5 of them. It just wouldn't make sense for the type of project that we're doing now. So if you chose something like extroversion, you'll only choose extroversion, and then you're going to look at another construct, probably something that does not have to do with personality. So if you are close to 5, if your number over here is closer to 5, that means you're going to rate yourself higher on that trait. So if you got 4.9 on openness, right, that means you're more open than closed. The closer you are to 1, the more closed you are, right? So for extroversion, if you score closer to 1 or 2, that means you're more introverted, right? For something like neuroticism, stability, if you score a 5 or something closer to a 5, that is neuroticism. Closer to a 1 means pretty stable. So here are the subscales, and it tells you which ones that you have to reverse code. And again, you can use any of the scales that I might have put up on the ACT measures. I noticed, so I typically teach research methods at a university, and they have access to a database called PsycTest that you don't have access to. So without the access to that, please go and find a scale either from the ACT measures where I already give you the scoring instructions and the items, or you can do a Google search. Sometimes that's harder to do because you might not have permission or access. You can certainly reach out to the researchers who have the scoring instructions, but because this is an intro class and because there's kind of a lack of time, I would rather you choose from one of the ACT measures that I already have up. Some of them might be dated, right? So I did talk to one of your classmates who wanted to use a scale that was like from the 1980s or so. There's nothing wrong with it, except for the fact that since things have changed over the last 30, if the 80s, oh my gosh, it's been 40 years. So like almost 40 years now, then you have items that don't include the same type of slang or daily language that we use today. So for example, if somebody was talking about how often do you fax other members of society or something like that, fax machines refer to a way of sending information. We don't do that. We use like email or texting or whatever now. So that might not be something that younger generations or your current generation might be used to answering. So for that reason, I want you to choose one of the measures that is a little bit more current. So within the last 20 years, if you find something from the 1990s and it's it's been validated and reliable, then just show me first. I should be okay with it. But this is what I want you to really utilize because you need the scoring instructions. We'll talk about how you can discuss in your paper, your project, that those scales that were available to you were either a little bit older, they weren't exactly what you were wanting to find. But for now, remember, part of introduction research methods, even when you're transferring over to your 4-year institution, just know that for right now, you might be limited, but in grad school, that's when you can do all of like the fancy, really interesting things that excite you. But for now, I just need you to have the foundation so that you know how to do this when you do transfer over and then when you do go to grad school, if that's within your academic plans. Here are a few helpful links for the BFI specifically. Colby College does do extensive research on the Big Five inventory. Now, if you wanted to look at something else like loneliness, UCLA has a loneliness scale. I think I've put that up for you before, but also to learn why reverse coding is necessary. All of this will be in your future Scikit-learn modules where you'll learn about why it's important to actually ask things in a reverse order. And this has to do with really showing that a person is accurately answering questions rather than just randomly answering to finish a survey. I'm sure you've been there before where you've gotten sick and tired of spending too much energy or too much time answering some kind of a survey. So you might kind of like start, dishonestly, like answering scales and things like that. But this is how we know, this is how we can tell when somebody is not answering accurately or they're rushing through something. So that will be kind of helpful for you to go through these. I know you can't click on this right now, but I'll have the PowerPoint of this up so that you can actually go to this. Otherwise, you can just do a quick Google search or try, I don't know how you would copy and paste this, but you could actually just type these into your browsers. Here's a citation for the BFI2 again. I know you saw it before. Remember, this isn't exactly an APA format. Everything is in APA format. It just needs to be double spaced. It has to have the indents. So for more information for the BFI2, you can look at this website. So colby.edu/psych/personality laboratory or lab. Okay, so I hope that was helpful, and I hope that this kind of showed you why you need to have scoring instructions for the measures or the surveys, questionnaires, or inventories that you find. Otherwise, you'll be giving a survey that you don't have the scoring instructions for, and you cannot complete your full-term project. So make sure that you do whatever scale you choose, you do know how to score it, you do have the scoring instructions. If there are any questions, feel free to email me. I will update a page on any of the questions that I think the class would benefit from. Otherwise, yeah, have a good day.